you're probably thinking, the more I exercise, the more weight I'm going to lose. Exercise is a useful tool for weight loss, but it actually doesn't seem like it is. In fact, it might be one of the biggest misnomers that we're coming to understand about human biology and metabolism. And so we're going to explore, stick with me. I know you guys will be like, what are you talking about? Exercise isn't effective for weight loss. Just bear with me, because we're going to explore some new research on metabolism and human energetics. And we're going to explore it through the lens of this very recent study and some of Herman Ponson's work. So let's just cut the chase, okay? I'm going to scroll all the way down, okay? There's this idea right here. There's 3 different models that encapsulate energy expenditure, okay? Most health professionals like myself and doctors, people, have come to understand this model right here, that the more I exercise, activity, energy, expenditure is what that stands for, the more it increases the amount of total calories expended, thus the more energy I need to put back into my body. Okay, so it's a positive linear curve. Then there is this idea of the performance model, and this performance model I've highlighted in the purple here, and I'm going to read it out for you. The performance model predicts that the resultant total calories burned due to activity will be higher than just the calories expended during the activity because of the additional energy spent on subsequent physical recovery and maintenance of a more expensive metabolic machinery to support this behavior. So this is the idea that the more energy we expend, the more calories we expend, that our metabolism, our metabolic machinery will adjust accordingly to this extra energy expended through exercise and physical activity. Then there is the compensation model. I'm just going to get right to it. This is what we're talking about here. This is the idea. Let me bring over this little diagram from Herman Ponson's book, who I highly recommend if you want to learn more about this. So we talk about additive. This is what most of the world think right now. Then we come over here. And actually, this idea that more exercise equals more calories is very, very likely wrong because, or demonstrated by, this constrained daily energy expenditure model. And what this implies is that the more physical activity that we do, it doesn't equal more daily energy expenditure for the average person doing the average amount of expenditure. In fact, what it does is it appears to decrease the amount of energy that other systems in the body need. Let me give you an example via a diagram that I'm just about to put out on my Instagram. Strength to Saad, baby. If you ain't following it, what are you doing? What are you doing? Don't sleep. Okay, I should definitely sleep. So here's what we're talking about here. So from a sedentary individual, like, they're fine. They have no stress, physical activity burden in order to take away from other systems. But as you get more and more active, and when you go to extreme physical activity, it seems that these other systems are burdened so much that they actually use less energy. So our immune system's downregulated. Our immune system requires X amount of energy per day, is now downregulated. HPA axis, so that's the axis that governs a lot of sex hormones. Hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, and the sympathetic nervous system. Reproductive system. This is why we see libido going down, typically for people who exercise to a very high extent. And testosterone lowering actually as well. And we see that again in the Hadza communities in Tanzania. And so we're like, okay, how do we see this? Why do we see this? Those are the questions. But this compensation or performance model seems to be a more accurate, and why actually a compensation model is a more accurate explanation to the more exercise. Well, let's zoom in right here. More exercise, actually, our basal energy expenditure decreases to accommodate for this extra energy expenditure through physical activity. So we are burdening and sacrificing other systems to compensate for extra physical activity. Let's assume this is correct for a second, okay? And let me read you in the green right here, because it's a nice little explanation. Alternatively, both humans and animals may respond to greater energy being expended on activity over the long term by reducing the energy expended on other processes, a phenomena captured by the compensation model. The compensation model assumes that energy budgets are somewhat constrained, which forces trade-offs between energy invested in activity energy expenditure and basal energy expenditure, thus predicting a negative relationship between activity energy expenditure and basal energy expenditure, which is what we see here. We see this negative relationship, a downward slope. It's like, what do you mean? The more exercise I do, it doesn't help me burn more calories? Well, to an extent, yes. It's not going to help you with weight loss. Let's dive in a little bit more nuance to that, because there are exceptions to the rule, and we won't dive into it now, but their exceptions to the rule are extreme activity. Extreme levels of physical activity, alike to Olympic athletes or ultra endurance runners and athletes, they definitely appear to have an uptick in actual daily energy expenditure. But it's not as significant as you think, but it is measurable and considerable enough. But that is an outlier among outliers. Now, it is currently unknown whether energy compensation in humans occurs only under extreme conditions, or at least only during periods of prescribed exercise where measured or inferred energy compensation has been documented on several occasions, so they have seen this many times, or instead whether it is a default model of energy expenditure in humans living typical lives. So just, this is like, is this our default? Or is this something that compensates in response to exercise at high conditions? This is what we're going to dive into just for a few more minutes on this topic, but you can pretty much stop watching the video right now if you want. Like, this is the crux of it. But what they noticed actually in this study, which is not the crux of it yet, so hold on 1 second. This was on a study, on the biggest study that they've done on this topic, on 1,700 people, and they found that people living normal lives to find that energy compensation by a typical human averages 28%. Due to reduced basal energy expenditure. This suggests that only 72% of the calories we burn from additional activity translates into extra energy burn that day. So there is about a quarter that is lost, or not lost, but is not accounted for, that we account for with our energy trackers, which are usually always inaccurate and overestimate commonly. Controlling for sex, age, and fat-free mass, compensation increases with fat mass. People that are at the 10th percentile of body mass index, so that the people that are the leanest, people like me, distribution compensate 27.7% of activity calories. Whereas people at the 90th percentile, so people who are really overweight and obese, people like really heavy, they're heavier than 90% of people, they compensate up to 50% of the activity calories. So there becomes like this maladaptive response, the fatter you are, to actually how much energy you expend. So we are telling overweight and obese people, you need to move more and exercise more. But what we are seeing is that at minimum, they are 50% of the energy expended during activity is essentially not utilized as actual energy expenditure to contribute to weight loss at minimum. It appears that individuals with greater fat levels are predisposed to increased adiposity, either because they are stronger energy compensators or because they become stronger compensators as they get fatter. The former, then, two people can be equally active, yet one puts on fat mass while the other one stays lean. If the latter, then such a positive feedback loop may imply that using exercise as a strategy to escape high adiposity becomes less and less effective the fatter and fatter you get. Excuse me. Now, Herman Ponce's work actually goes even further to demonstrate this. As I did a post here on Instagram on Strength of Saad a little while back, we saw, okay, even if this was the case, wouldn't you still see physically active people, okay, they would still burn more energy and they would have a total daily energy expenditure that was higher, okay, even if this was the case. Well then, why don't we see Hadza men and women who get 16,000 steps plus a day? They have 4 to 5 hours of physical activity a day. And when we compare them to men and women from industrialized populations in Britain, America, what we see is that they burn essentially the same number of calories when we equate for age, sex, fat mass, lean body mass, Wouldn't we see a difference? Yet we still don't. And the explanation for this appears to be because our metabolism shifts to make room for increased energy costs, keeping daily energy expenditure within a narrow window within the average person. And that narrow window appears to be around 2,500 to 3,000 kilocalories per day. Of course, that's total daily energy expenditure. Of course, now you may be thinking, this is going to be changed as you increase in lean body mass. That will increase the amount of energy needed in, but energy out for the average person appears to be around this range. It can change depending on body comp, but this potentially appears to explain, this constrained model appears to explain why hunter-gatherers and industrialized sedentary people burn or expend essentially the same amount of calories. When I say burn, we mean have the same total daily energy expenditure, approximately equating for age, height, sex, mass, body comp. And then we do trials, and then we see, okay, and you can see here in this diagram, I'll do another post you guys can see on Strength of Saad that explains this a little more in depth, but we have mice, a study on mice on the right. They had 0 to 7 days. They were not using the wheel. Then they started using the wheel. And then they saw this slight uptick in daily energy expenditure. But then they noticed this plateau. It's not like, so they were sedentary. And then they started being active. And it had a slight uptick. Okay, cool. But this idea that, all right, they're using more and more activity. We expect to see the factorial model, the traditional model, the additive model, assumes that we would see daily energy expenditure continue to increase. But we don't. The more activity they do. But we're not mice. Roger that. Half marathon study. These women were doing, I believe they were sedentary. Let me just double check. These women went from never exercising to running 25 miles, per week. And by week 40, their daily energy expenditure was only 120 kilocalories higher. No exercise. They did the whole study, and they ended up running up to, up to 60 minutes a session, 25 miles a week. BMR, if anything, it looks like there's a bit of signal going down, but essentially stays the same. We see a little bit of an uptick in the beginning, and then we see a plateau downward a little bit to go back to baseline. Fortunately, shows like The Biggest Loser set up a really bad precedent for people and understanding of what it takes to actually transform your health and wellness. You do not have to kill yourself with exercise in order to transform your body. Instead, training smart, consistently, and paying a lot of attention, the lowest hanging fruit, the 80-20, what is the 20% of work that's going to get me 80% of the results, will be your nutrition and the energy coming in. There are exceptions to the rule, of course, but that's not the purpose of this video. Let me know what you guys think below. If you've heard of this research, if this makes sense to you, and if you want to know more, well, you guys can see my Instagram. You can subscribe on my email list at strengthofsaad.com, and subscribe on the YouTube channel if you guys want to see more, or you can listen to it on now podcast platforms. It's now on Spotify if you prefer to listen to this stuff. Let me know what you guys think, your thoughts, complaints, mind explosions below. See you in the next one.